Hello, hello. Welcome to Healthy Perspectives, a podcast that takes on current cultural and social issues through a clinical lens. Hello, hello. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. Like every other time that I talk to you, I appreciate you being here. I am so grateful to have you participating with me in this process. And today I'm going to take you to some dialogue. I want to show you a trap that we fall into, or we're capable of falling into, any of you out there, including myself. We are all capable of falling into this trap. And this is an interesting one because I'm going to use some dialogue that I have had with somebody on YouTube. So you are welcome to go and look at all the details of the dialogue. I will be putting some of this up on the screen for those of you who are watching on Rumble or YouTube. You can follow along. But on January the 5th of this year, we released a video, a podcast called "Gay is Gone and Its Progress for Racial Equity." That is the one that I'm going back and I'm following up on, because I've had this dialogue that in the last few days has increased a little bit and caused some good conversation, in my opinion, to come from it. Some of it is healthy, some of it is probably not as healthy. I'm going to try to zero in on what is significant, what I believe is significant for you, the audience, when it comes to this particular topic. So let me go over a little super quick recap of the January 5th podcast. This is by no means going to do it justice. If you want to go take a look at it, please do. But the gist is this. There were three elements that I highlighted that made Dr. Claudine Gay unfit to be at Harvard. Now, one of the questions that came up that I'm not going to address in later on in the dialogue that was going on, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little heads up on this. I do believe that Harvard thought she was a best fit. Maybe I'll address that. We'll see where I go. But there's three reasons in the aftermath that she was not the best fit. Number one, she had an inconsistent application of rules. That's not a good idea in a leadership position, to have inconsistent applications of rules. If you're going to apply a rule differently, there has to be a justification for doing so that explicitly explains why it's necessary to treat it differently. Number two, plagiarism. 50 times or more, apparently. Now, I will be addressing this one directly because it became a massive part of the trap that I'm going to show you today. Okay. It's a massive part of it. All right. Hang in there. Number three is the testimony that she gave at Congress. Her inability to denounce hate showed poor judgment. That by itself is not good, but when you combine it with these other things, that poor judgment seems to be a pattern. The plagiarism, poor judgment. The inconsistent application of rules, poor judgment. I don't know what else was in her human resources records or whatever, but this isn't a good situation for the president of a major university, any major university. So I went on in part two of that podcast to highlight the accountability to a standard regardless of race as being one of those main components as to why it's probably good for equity. Because see, somebody, even though, a lot of people are hating on Harvard and whatever, because they've made some pretty poor decisions. It's true. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I can say with confidence that it's for the right reasons. But needless to say, they did hold a standard somewhere, which means they at some point finally disregarded the race the sex, the gender of the president, Claudine Gay, and said, look, we we have to stand for something. Well, most of that, it seems to be, at least on the outside looking in, is it's settled on the plagiarism as the main reason as to why they finally said, you know what, the judgment is just, this is too much. Um, Today, I want to show you an interaction I had with somebody that I don't know. So for those of you following along on Rumble or YouTube, you're going to get to see this because I'm going to go ahead and put it up on my screen and walk you through it. All right. So hang in there with me. Uh, the uh, the uh, the beginning of this shows 9 days ago. Okay. There's more before this. For those of you who are following along, I'll tell you there's a whole bunch more, but I'm going to skip down to where it becomes actually significant. You are welcome to go back and read it. I'm not hiding anything. It's all out there. I'm not changing anything. You can access this information, see what happened before this, because frankly, we weren't talking about the same topic before this. Unconventional reasoning, whoever this is, male, female, I don't even know. They said the where we got to is a focus, a digging down into the plagiarism. And I'm going to show you the trap door that there is for anybody who thinks they are an elite academic, somebody who's gotten a bachelor degree, a master degree, a doctoral degree. There is a trap that you can get sucked into if you're not careful. And so my recommendation, please be careful. And what's the trap? It's the elitist mentality trap. I'm going to show it to you play out here in real time, right here in front of you on my screen, if you are following along. The first thing unconventional reasoning says here 9 days ago is, at Healthy Perspectives, that's us, there is rarely a best fit. There are usually several excellent fits. The future role a person will fill is unknown, so a hiring committee extrapolates with uncertainty. Why do people think Harvard did not choose Dr. Gay as an excellent fit? First of all, you can go back and read it. I didn't allude to her not being an excellent fit at the time. But in the aftermath, she's clearly not the best fit. Then it goes on, they go on. When did Dr. Gay, as president, not show due process in her application of Harvard rules? I responded with, it's likely Harvard thought she was a great fit. Hindsight being 2020, she wasn't a great fit. She showed terrible judgment in many situations that turned out to be very important. Plagiarism and exclusion of certain groups while going out of her way to include other groups are the most notable. The result was she found herself in the spotlight of politics. As far as not, as, oh my gosh, folks, I apologize. As for not showing due process, I put in an extra word there and it didn't make sense. She made herself political by excluding some groups to participate on campus that were not dangerous and happened to be Republican-based groups, which is true. That's verifiable, which I did in the original podcast. So I'm not going to get into that here. Simultaneously, she justified campus behavior that went against Harvard Code of Conduct because the group shared her views. She probably could have done it in a way that didn't draw attention, but she didn't have the wisdom to do so, which is an important ability for a politically motivated president of any university. Okay, set that aside now. They respond with, they focus in on the plagiarism. So here we go. This is the beginning of the trap. At Healthy Perspectives, first, for academic work at graduate level and beyond, What she did is not plagiarism. Did you hear it? Did you hear the trap, folks? Please tell me you heard it. I'll come back in a second. People are taking what they were told in high school and trying to apply it in a different context. Did you hear it? It's even more clear in that line. What this unconventional reasoning person is saying is, if you're a high school student, the bar is set really strictly. If you're a college student working for your bachelor degree, it's just as strict. If you are working for your doctoral degree or you have a doctorate, well, then the plagiarism stuff doesn't fit quite as well. What? Please help me with this. Do you see it? The elitist mentality. Oh, don't worry, folks. I'm going to help you see it more clearly because it gets even more blatant. Hang with me. The next thing they do is they go on and say, what groups did she exclude or include? What Harvard Code of Conduct was violated? Please stop making stuff up. You can go back to my podcast. I didn't make stuff up. I actually provided the sources even. So whatever. All right. Then I respond, did she accurately cite her sources? If not, it's plagiarism, no matter the academic level. Then I ask, do you have an advanced degree? So here's what I'm suggesting. I am suggesting to them that plagiarism is a standard of behavior. It's not a dependent behavior on your elitism. It's a standard of behavior. And every major university has a plagiarism policy. All of them, every single one of them. I don't care if it's an elite Ivy League school. I don't care if it's a state school. I don't care if it's a community college. They all have a plagiarism policy. All right, going on. They respond to me. If things are said in multiple places, it is unnecessary to cite a specific source. That's not accurate. Straight up, that's inaccurate. But that's okay. Moving on. In one analysis, 3 sources were considered. One was her thesis advisor. The things she wrote were probably part of their conversations over the years. That's probably true. His name is also on the document. So finding one place where he wrote it in the paper is irrelevant. That's also false. Just because you got the source in person doesn't mean you don't cite the source. You can still cite the source. And you should. Yes, I have a PhD. Some of my advisor's papers were in my bibliography, but I never quoted them specifically. Whew. Now we have a potential problem, which I pointed out. Obviously, this is going to cause some friction, but it is what it is. If you haven't seen it, you will. Unfortunately, you seem to have been given poor teaching about plagiarism. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm just saying you didn't get, look, I am capable of not being informed about things too. So this isn't a point of judgment. It's saying you might want to take a closer look. Although, I go on to say, although plagiarism is only illegal if it infringes on intellectual property rights, it is considered unethical to use any original information without citing it. This includes concepts and quotes. If information is used multiple times within the same article or book, it is considered plagiarism if it's not cited every time. This is not rocket science. This is pretty easy. Go look at different plagiarism policies. This is not difficult to ascertain. Though citing things each time seems annoying and often makes it look hold on, let me expand that, look like we don't have many original ideas, it is actually really important for finding sources, but also for helping people see our original ideas. Why? Because the original ideas won't be cited. So if you got this long, 6-page paper, 20-page paper, 100 book, I don't care. The things that are not cited are the original content. The things that are cited. All of it. Okay, I said more clearly in our writing. Based on what you said in the previous response, it's possible, I'm not saying it happened, it's possible you plagiarized as well. So I hope this helps. Thanks for participating in the discussion. Okay. They, of course, were not pleased with that. And when I look at that, I was pretty gentle, pretty direct, but pretty gentle. I wasn't probably as gentle as I should have been. They said, unfortunately, you seem to have been giving for teaching about plagiarism beyond the high school level. Okay, they're mad. I can tell. And they took it personal, which was not my intent, but I understand how in writing that can happen. And also, they say poor reading comprehension ability. So they had to one-up me. Okay, I get it. They're totally offended. If information is used in multiple sources, it is not plagiarism to use it without citing, which they are again saying something that's incorrect. It's incorrect. You have to cite it every time within the paper, the book, whatever. You have to cite it every time because it's not yours. I found this article in case, as I was, it has gone past intellectual property and has entered common use. Okay, I'll get into that here in a minute. I didn't plagiarize, but you're too clueless to realize that they name call. Clearly, they are offended. I had to try to find a way to soften the blow that I had already thrown. So my response was, I never insinuated anything about your IQ. It seems you're looking for a reason to hate me. If you're interested in knowing more about plagiarism, I'd recommend Irving Hexham. He was one of the people referenced by my professors. I found this article in case you're interested. If you're only interested in calling me stupid, please stop commenting altogether. Thanks. Mostly I was just setting a boundary there, relational boundary. It's like, yeah, we don't have to go there. Again, remember, I don't know who this person is. I have zero clue. Ooh, they edited it. Interesting. Oh, they edited it again. Those are new. All right, I'm going to be excited to read this out loud here. They actually got rid of part of the healthy perspectives even. Okay, cool. No, I did not plagiarize my thesis. Your suggestion of that is basically calling me stupid. Okay. Do you think there is an absolute line for what is and is not plagiarism? Do you think I might be as knowledgeable as you about plagiarism, or does that seem impossible? Are you interested in knowing about plagiarism? All right, cool. No, I'm good with that. All right. I responded with, my response still makes sense because they didn't hardly change anything. They just edited out part of the initial part. It might be good for you to reread the thread. I didn't say you plagiarized. I intentionally suggested you may not have been taught or taught correctly around it because that happens to all of us at times. I'm being pretty loving and gentle there, I think. It would also mean it's not plagiarism because plagiarism is intentional, not accidental. Your desire to blame me and defend yourself makes me wonder if this was not probably the best. It makes me wonder if you're insecure, because this is my counseling side coming out a little bit, but it doesn't make me think you're stupid. I happen to be very open to learning and growing. I don't assume I know everything or even everything about plagiarism. It's possible you know a lot more about plagiarism than I do. The parts that I know are sound and verifiable. That's why I included the link in the previous one that I said, the link and the name of the people who my professor taught me about. I had great educators and I'm grateful for it. Is this a sensitive topic for you for some reason? They responded with, I was taught about plagiarism very well. I understand your understanding seems to be flawed. They're back to saying, I'm not getting it. I'm not talking about all plagiarism. I'm talking about what we have described here. Okay. Because you seem to ignore the context of the field. Here's the trap, folks. Here's the trap. You saw it earlier. You're going to see it again. It's funny to now throw out the possibility that I'm insecure. All right, whatever. I probably didn't need to go down that path, but you said it's possible you plagiarized. And I followed with that, or that with your suggestion of that. Why do you misrepresent things? You yourself said, I didn't. You can go read it. I didn't misrepresent myself in any way. The whole point of Professor, and then they go off on Professor Hexham's article, which is good. They read the article. Great. He proposes a working definition to help clarify the situation. The following definition is proposed, much of what the Free Beacon article found would be common usage. Okay, so they didn't give me the specific example. Which if you go read the article that was there, which you're welcome to do, Professor Hexham, their stuff is good. The common usage definition is what they're trying to continue to root in here. Great. Words which Hexham put in quotes without citation because they themselves are in common usage. All right, fine. For a while now, I tend to use single quotes instead of double quotes, discussion of section, the requirements for, this includes the field involved. True, this is true that there is understanding with which it is in the profession. I'm not negating that. That, in terms of common use, absolutely from within the field. No problem with that. But when you multiply, when you're using multiple lines that come directly from a source and you don't change them to common language, it's not common use. It's plagiarism. All right, so whatever, we go on. The ideas need to be cited in any PhD thesis, but how much paraphrasing is fine and how much the direct quote should simply be used varies. Okay. I mean, that's interesting. In Dr. Gay's field, the quotation requirements are less strict than in Hexham's, according to the people whose work was compared at the Free Beacon article. Okay. So they're saying because of Dr. Gay's field, Dr. Gay can quote people multiple lines and not cite it, which is false. They go on to say, I am continuing with this discussion because I want to stay on the right side of what I write next. It's not about what I wrote in the past. I'm not at risk of getting fired as a president of Harvard, Okay, I wrote, so you're suggesting that earning a bachelor's degree in economics and a PhD in government means that she could copy people's work without giving them credit because of her fields of study. That doesn't seem consistent with what I've learned. As a student professor, isn't she bound by the ethics of the institution when it comes to plagiarism? And the truth about that is absolutely. If that's correct, the next step would be to ask what the plagiarism rules were at Harvard when she published the articles from 1998 to 2016. I couldn't access the historical publications of Harvard's plagiarism guidelines, but if it's anything close to their current language, it's considered stealing, whether it's done on purpose or accident, and the guidelines for what it is seems very clear, which it does. I actually put that down here. You can see this. The link right there. Yep. I put that link in there for whoever this unconventional reasoning person is. According to the following link, you will see what she did is clearly plagiarism according to Harvard's guidelines. Should we dismiss this because of her field of study? That seems like a bad idea to me. We could sit here and debate this based on what you know or what I know. The reality of the situation is she plagiarized based on Harvard's guidelines. Therefore, what you know and what I know doesn't really equate to much. Would you agree, or do you think she shouldn't be held to the standard of the institution for some reason? And there's the information. They respond, I think the Harvard guide to using sources, here comes the trap, folks, has to be considered in context of the level of the work. The specific verbiage highlighted in the Free Beacon article you referenced in the video is probably so common that it can be heard over and over at the conferences in the field. This gets to common usage. Okay, here comes the trap. In the discussion and caution section, he writes, in most cases, the charge of plagiarism would be unjust because there are a limited number of ways in which a certain basic information can be conveyed introductory textbooks or very short articles that requires the author to comment on a well-known events and outbreaks and so on. But skipping further, people seem to think she was sitting with papers of others and describing them in her document. That's generally not how the writing phase happens. That's true. It's not how the writing phase typically happens. She wasn't copying other people's works, except she did. She was writing some things which everyone else also said. Okay, so that comes to the common use part. Except if you're multiple lines that are identical, that's not considered common use. It's just not. When you are using a line that is considered common, that's fine. But 2 lines maybe. But when you're talking 3, 4, 5 lines of plagiarism with no citation, that's not common use, folks. That's plagiarism. That's stealing, according to Harvard. The sentences being highlighted foundational to her own work. So it fits with what would be written in the textbook, except not. Go look at that podcast that I put out. Go look at the content that's been plagiarized. The Harvard guidelines are set up to, here's the trap, to address undergraduate academic misconduct by copying, pasting from sources a student might find false. That is somebody saying there's a different expectation when you're a doctor than when you're a master or a bachelor or a high school graduate. Now, that's false. The expectations should increase, not decrease, with education. That's what I'm saying to you. The trap is the elitist mentality kicks in and we start to convince ourselves we are writing for our most knowledgeable professors who know all this stuff. And the professors, because they have the elitist, not all of them, but many of them have the elitist mentality themselves, they say, oh, that's just common use. Moving on. Except what ends up happening, and here's the punchline for you, folks. With that elitist mentality, we stop connecting things backwards. We start taking credit where credit isn't due. That's the trap. They go on to say those sources and the textbooks are most of the student's knowledge foundation. It is different for a PhD candidate who has been immersed in the field for several years. Both ideas and verbiage become part of the field's vernacular. Just cite it saying unknown. That's okay. You could do that because I don't know where I got it. I have no idea where this came from. I know I've heard it on multiple occasions. Just write unknown. Do yourself the favor and be more diligent. Professor might say to you, if it's unknown, then why don't you go find out where it's from? That's a great professor. That would be good studenting, good professoring. Removing the need for citations, or at least for direct quotations. One of the ways to measure a common usage level is how many sources something shows up in without citation. Ooh, just because it shows up without citation doesn't mean you assume they did it correctly. Actually, the opposite. You say, wait a minute, where did that come from? You ask the question. And in an information age where you can find almost everything that you want online, it's silly not to. If someone looks at 3 or 4 economic textbooks and they all say the same, something alike, the supply demand graph is used to find an optimal price, that no longer needs to be quoted or cited. I would say I disagree. Why don't you just quote the textbook then? That's easy. Oh, which one? Doesn't matter. Quote one of them. Let that be your source. That's not a problem. Okay. I respond, reaching the conclusion. They said, again, reaching the conclusion, copying people's work with poor analysis is one of the reasons the idea of evidence-based research needs to end. I don't necessarily agree with that. But it's an interesting separate conversation I would love to have with somebody. It makes people think that a little bit of evidence immediately leads to correct conclusion. I think that is a good point. Not going to lie, that's a good point. But evidence is barely 20% of what it takes to reach. I don't know where they came up with 20%. I've never seen that number myself, but I do know that you having evidence requires multiple layers. Okay. I expect very little from the Washington Free Beacon, so jumping to incorrect conclusions is fitting for them. They go on to insult the Washington Free Beacon. That's fine. I don't disagree. Like, great. Okay. I mean, let's be real. Most of our media is not citing their sources very well these days. And, that we could have that conversation separately. I wrote, I hear you on the common use exception to plagiarism. It can be difficult to know at times when it switches to common use, but it remains a valid argument. I was giving them a compliment right there. The only piece of your last comments that concern me is the perception you projected about the rule being for the undergraduates. It comes as though it comes across as though PhD students are above the rules. That's a slippery slope and seems like an unhealthy approach to academics or even life in general. What makes you believe this is reasonable? They responded, you see how I'm confronting the trap that academics creates. The reason I'm saying the line is different is that the line is different for the PhD thesis and publications is that they have a better sense of common use exception, and their drafts are read by others who would also have a sense of that. Folks, have I ever told you what narcissism is? Narcissism, and this I can speak to comfortably, is about putting yourself around others who are elite like you. That's the trap, folks. The narcissistic mentality is being taught and bred academically. I just proved an example to you. And unfortunately, there's thousands, maybe millions of these kinds of examples going on out there. They're not hard to find. And that's a narcissistic mentality. Now, I'm not calling unconventional reasoning narcissistic. It's a learned behavior here. It's a learned behavior. They said it's different for a PhD thesis and publications is that they have a better sense of common use exception. Then they should have a better sense of the origin. I'm suggesting there's a laziness effect going on here. I don't want to find the origin, which I get to that laziness thing here in a minute. So I'm just going to move on. That's the trap. That's the trap. That's the trap. We are susceptible to this, believing that we are better than. That's a trap, folks. That's an academic trap. They go on a paper over, an undergraduate writes a paper over a few weeks, mainly on their own, and turns it in. That's true. Their main exposure to the subject has been through their sources. Also true. The PhD student has worked on their research for several years. That's usually true. Has often presented the work to others, both in their department and outside. That's also true. And has read about it extensively. Also true, if they're in a good PhD program, and has attended conferences. Also true. They learn the vernacular of the field. So the common use phrases are the things they talk about commonly. Ooh, that's interesting. But shouldn't they also know where they originate? Being able to cite the more original content for the ideas. Yes. The common use then would then cease to exist. Matter of fact, the argument that they make here would suggest that they know where these things come from, and therefore they should be able to cite them better, not less. I think this is reasonable because the fields, they go on to say, the fields which are very language dependent, like literature or religion, can set the requirements of quotation more strictly. Other fields, like the physical and social sciences, can emphasize the ideas more than specific wording. I agree with that part of it. But you still cite the sources, the original sources, whenever possible. So why is it that we can get away from citing sources? That doesn't make any sense. A PhD student, a doctoral professor, a master student, or somebody with a master who's working in their profession ought to be better at citing sources. They go on, or I go on to respond to that. I agree that the common usage seems inherently different from with depth of education. I think this is where many people who create scholarly works must remain vigilant and be aware of themselves as much as the work itself. It becomes easier to convince ourselves that everyone knows or everyone ought to know when they don't. What I'm saying there, folks, is when you write your doctoral thesis, I think it's a terrible idea to write it for your professor. It ought to be written for anybody who might pick it up. If you think of it like that, plagiarism is less likely. It's less likely because I'm not writing it for the people who know. I'm writing it for those who may not know. See the difference in mentality? That one is the trap of I am better and I'm writing for people who are better. The other is I am no better and I'm writing it for other people like me who are coming up, trying to figure it out. All right, I go on and I say, I am the trap. It becomes easier to convince ourselves that everyone knows or everyone ought to know when they don't. Not only do they not know, potentially, it creates paths that don't bridge the gaps of history when we don't cite things. It also comes across to me as somewhat lazy, which I already highlighted, not directed to you in any way. I don't know you because it's easy to find sources in the internet age anyway. All this was a setup to say the following. I believe it would be wise for extra vigilance, extra diligence for those educated at the master and doctoral level to ensure proper identification of sources and to err on the side of caution as an example for everyone. Because truly, if I am smarter than you, I ought to be imparting that onto you so that hopefully you can achieve what I have and more. Not so that I can pin you down with my elitism and say, oh, you can't enter here because we are better than you. That's a terrible mentality. It's not a servant mentality. Socially, culturally, it's unhealthy. It's a narcissistic approach versus a servant approach. For example, many people don't realize that a bridge exists between the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Yes, I in fact picked that on purpose because it makes the point more clearly. Spider-Man said that, Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt. It was also in that French words there. If it's translated, there was a publication put out during the French Revolutionary War where it was basically saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And also the following quote. Now, there's probably other sources, but I gave you some original sources. So I'm talking about bridging the gap between that quote, which is in these multiple spots, and a quote from the Bible that says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much will be asked. If you're a doctoral candidate, if you're a master student, if you're a bachelor degree holder, if you have earned your doctoral degree, your master degree, your bachelor degree, your high school diploma, much has been given and much will be demanded. You have to step it up further, not less. I hope that this was useful in identifying for you a problem with the educational institutions, but not because I want to demean anybody or any institution. But if I show you the trap, my hope is you won't fall into it. And that when you get your master degree, when you get your PhD, or you're a doctor or a lawyer, that you will still show up as a servant of the people around you and love them and care for them and bring them along, as opposed to accepting this idea that because you now have your doctorate, you're something special. Because you're only going to be special if you bring other people along. If you help people, if you serve people with your gift, that's the only way you are actually going to be special. And that is an everyday decision. That is not a degree on your wall. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for following us, liking us, subscribing, all those things. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. We appreciate our audience a lot, so we give you some simple ways to track us down. Please like, subscribe, and follow all the podcasts on different platforms, but you can also email us at healthyperspectives@protonmail.com, or you can check out our website at healthy-perspectives.com/podcast. It's a backward slash. So if you want to go to our landing page, if you go to healthy-perspectives.com, you'll still find us. You just got to click on the podcast button. Thank you so much.